Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with jazz pianist Fabian Almazan. We talked to him in May 2020 about his life in jazz and the new surreal COVID-19 world. He opened up about his latest 2019 CD, This Land Abounds with Life. He found his musical roots as a child in his homeland of Havana, Cuba, where he first became involved in the classical piano tradition. When his parents could not afford to pay for private piano lessons, he migrated to Miami, and things took off from there. He's got a great story. Enjoy.
I guess before we get into your latest album from last year and, kind of your life in music, when did you start realizing, maybe mid-March or even earlier, that things, like, when did your gigs start getting canceled? When did you start realizing the gravity of us getting into this 2-month quarantine?
March 13th at 9 a.m. I was on my way to LA I was going to play in Disney Hall. And I was about to get a cab to go to the airport when I got just this avalanche of texts and emails saying that everything pretty much was canceled for the rest of the year. Yeah.
And they knew then that everything was going to be canceled for the rest of the year.
Well, I mean, the laws were starting to get put in place in California. They've made it so that you couldn't have large gatherings. I think you couldn't have more than 50 people at that time, something like that, in one place at one time in one place. And then May 13th. That's when everything for me became very clear that things were not going to be the same for possibly years.
What are you doing right now creatively to keep your spirits up?
Well, musically, I haven't had as much time as I would like to really be practicing and composing, just because I run a label, and I've really been trying to do everything I can to help the musicians, both on the label and on the albums that we've put out. So I've been running the Biophilia Records Festival since April 22nd, and we've been doing we were supposed to have a concert series here in New York that started on April 22nd, which was the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, because our label, the whole philosophy behind it is environmental awareness and climate change and all those things. So we were all set to have a 2-week run at the Jazz Gallery of all 14 artists, but that obviously got canceled. So it's been really challenging, but also very rewarding to just very quickly adapt and have the entire concert series online. That's been taking up a lot of time. All of the proceeds that are coming in are going directly to the artists. The label isn't keeping any of the money. And we're also making all the albums available free of charge or pay what you can for the fans, because I know that a lot of our fans also have no income. I'm just trying to do whatever I can to help everybody out in this time of need. The festival will be done in a couple of weeks, and then I'll be able to practice and compose and all those things.
I guess let's kind of depart from what's going on right now and talk a little bit about your latest album. Was Land Abounds with This Land Abounds with Life, and it's an album that's relatively new enough for people to get and have during this time of quarantine, which people have more time to probably indulge in the arts, but you can't back it up with live performances. How does that feel for you?
Well, it's very interesting because a lot of my peers, I've had this conversation with a lot of my peers, just the difference in what it feels like to do one of these online concerts versus one with people in the audience. There's this intangible sort of visceral experience as a performer that's pretty difficult to describe. There's just some energy in whichever room you're performing in when there's an audience that it's just not there when you're playing for your camera, basically. It's rough not being able to share that, art with the people. That's the whole point of it. It's not the whole point of it, because for me it serves as medicine as well. I really wouldn't be able to live my life if I weren't able to just play the piano in a room by myself, because it feels good for me. It's my It's my sort of medicine that keeps me going. But I like to share that with people as well, because that, I experience it as an audience member whenever I go to a performance where the music is so moving that it really helps me in my life to do whatever I need to do. It just makes me feel alive. So I wish we could be doing that for people, but it's not worth the risk of people literally losing their lives. It's just not worth it. I'd be happy not to perform for 10 years if it meant that it didn't possibly kill someone. I don't want to do that. It's not worth it.
Let me ask you this. Your beginnings, you're from Cuba. Talk to me a little bit about how, music and jazz became a part of your life.
Sure. Well, yeah, as you stated, I was born in Cuba. The reason I don't have an accent is because my mom was a translator for English. She was born in Cuba but grew up in Great Neck, Long Island, and then became a hippie and didn't graduate from high school and went back to Cuba when she was 17. And she's now here in Miami. That kind of got away from your question. But I grew up with a father who was a bass player. He was one of the founders of the electric bass school in Cuba. So I grew up hearing a lot of Weather Report in the background all the time. And, in Cuba, every corner of every block, there's somebody playing an instrument. So that was just around me all the time. When I was 9, we left, and by then I had started playing classical music, classical piano. We spent some time in Mexico before we crossed the border into Texas. And I spent maybe a year without a piano then, but thanks to people's generosity in Miami, that's where we ended up, I was able to get a really cheap piano, but I still loved it. And it wasn't until high school that I really got into jazz. I went to New World School of the Arts, where a lot of other brilliant jazz musicians have gone to. I'm not calling myself a brilliant jazz musician. I'm just saying there were a lot of people that went to school there that have really gone on to make a huge difference in the art. So it was at New World School of the Arts where I guess when I was a sophomore, I started getting more into jazz, and I was really into Keith Jarrett and Oscar Peterson and Gonzalo Rubalcaba. Those were my three, as pianists that I ate, slept, breathed their music all day for years when I was in high school.
How have your Cuban roots influenced the sound, the voice that you have on your instrument?
I don't know. That's hard to answer. I just happen to be born in that part of the world the same way that everybody else happens to be born where they are. I love my Cuban heritage. I don't know. I try to just embrace being an artist as a human being, not so much as where I was born. I had the privilege of traveling all over the world and meeting all sorts of people, getting to experience different cultures. As beautiful as the Cuban culture is, it's one out of many. So, yeah, I just try to be myself, and part of that is the fact that I'm Cuban and it's in my blood. But I try to embrace every culture. I'm a fan of Nelson Mandela, who brought people together. That's all I want to do with music. I really don't try to think of a genre or nationality or anything like that. Rather, just enjoy the experience of music.
What was the first live jazz show you ever saw that really kind of blew your mind?
As far as I can remember, I think it might have been Gonzalo when I was in Miami. He played at the Hollywood Festival. And yeah, that was great. And I remember he taught a master class at University of Miami that I went to as well. And I had never seen a pianist between the time that his knees started to bend for him to sit down at the piano and when he finally sat down at the piano. He had already played an arpeggio from the bottom of the piano to the top of the piano, and that just blew my mind. And just his touch, the ballads, the way he would play them, every single note just had this clarity to it, and the from the first millisecond, you knew it was Gonzalo just because he's able to get such a distinct sound out of the piano. The first performance I saw in New York, however, was when I visited. I was still in high school. I visited New York, and it was kind of a bizarre concert in hindsight. It was a double bill at the Blue Note in the middle of winter, I think. It was James Carter and Paquito Rivera, two saxophone players / clarinet player, well, multi-instrumentalists that could not be more different. And I just remember thinking, wow, New York is very open-minded. So, yeah, that was memorable.
Huh. What about mentors? Who have been big influences for you?
Christian McBride, I guess, was the first one. Once I was actually going into music as a career, I never really thought of being a pianist or a composer or anything like that as a career up until high school was over. For me, I had always just been fascinated by music and really wanted to learn everything I could from it. Jim Gazier was the first mentor I had in Miami. He was the jazz teacher at New World School of the Arts, and he was very generous with his time, and he was very patient with me. I think I was one of those creative students that he would tell me to do something, and I kind of wouldn't do it. But yeah, then once I got into the Brubeck Institute, and Justin Brown, Tommy Morimoto, Anthony Coleman, and Joe Sanders were the other students. I was the very first year of the Brubeck Institute. Christian McBride was the artistic director, and Mark Levine was the jazz piano teacher, and the two of them were, I mean, not to mention Dave Brubeck, of course, who was very inspirational. He really tried to instill in all of us a sense of exploration. He said whenever we travel anywhere, just really try to hear the music, the folkloric music from there, go to the museums. And, you know, for impressionable 18-year-olds, that's exactly what I needed, just somebody to tell me to be open-minded and just embrace everything. Christian McBride was just a warm, comforting figure during a time where, you know, when you're 18 years old, the world seems pretty freaking big and intimidating, and he always just was very supportive of us. Mark Levine just had all the information, so that was great. Then I moved to New York, and the first teacher that I had at Manhattan School of Music, I'm trying to remember if he was actually the first one. Yeah, I think he was Kenny Barron. It was great having lessons with him, because if you've ever spoken to somebody who's been his student, you should show up and play standards the entire time. You barely even talk. And I really needed that. Gary Dow was also somebody who was very helpful to me, not just as a teacher and a musician, but on a personal level. He was very encouraging during a time in my life where I was kind of, you know, I was struggling in New York. I had no money. Things were looking pretty dire. Jason Moran was another teacher that I had at Manhattan School of Music, and then I started playing with Terrence Blanchard, and I learned a ton with him, not only about performing and touring, but also film scoring. I've been a part of a lot of sessions for films that he's composed music for, and that's been extremely educational for me.
What do you like the best about being a musician?
The medicinal part of it, but there have been times in my life where I've become really frustrated with music because I imagine things musically that I can't bring to life, and that's been very frustrating. And also just finding other musicians that are like-minded. So there's one period in my life where I thought I was just going to stop making music, and then I heard the Brahms cello sonata in E minor and the one in F major, and it's just, there's something so mysterious and magical about music that saves lives. It makes life so much better. And that's basically it. It's just, I don't know if I could imagine my life without that emotional outlet. I need it.
You've kind of touched on, you know, just the influence of just being a human instead of nationalities and countries. But during this time of the absence of live jazz, and, you know, we're shrouded in ambiguity, we're not sure when that's going to pick back up. But during this time, it's about 2 months that we've been away from it, what memories of trips or moments on stage or times with, musicians have you had that you've been drawing strength off of?
That's a great question. Well, the one that always comes to mind was the first time that I played at the Village Vanguard as a leader with my own band, and that was for the release of my first album, which was called Personalities. I had worked really, really hard on that album. I wrote string quartet arrangements, and Camila Mesa was singing. I'm a happily married man right now, very in love, but back then that week I had just gotten dumped by my girlfriend at the time, and it happened in the Serengeti in Africa. That's a long story, but I was not feeling that well. Yeah, and there was this kid in the front row of the Vanguard while we were performing that in the Vanguard, the audience in the first row is like centimeters away from you as a pianist. And I could just see the smile in this young kid's face and how much he was enjoying the music. And that just completely made everything worth it. It justified every ounce of energy that I had put into it, because it made me feel so good that this young human being is getting that, sorry to keep saying medicine, but it is getting it and was enjoying it. And I could die a happy man after that, just because I know that I've made somebody's life better that moment. That was a great feeling. I think of that moment all the time as a musician.
That story reminds me of one. I was watching the documentary on Dave Grohl, and it was like the birth of the Foo Fighters. And, after everything had gone down with Cobain and, he didn't know what he was going to do, he went, I believe, it was a real remote part of the world. He was on vacation. It was either remote Europe or Africa somewhere, and he was literally at a point where he said, I'm done. I'm not doing this. I can't do it. And he saw some kid walking along the side of the road with a Nirvana shirt on, and he just started crying. Like, he was just like, if I can do that to some human so far away from civilization, this has to continue. So it's the magic. It's what and I don't think you're saying it. I really like that you're saying the word medicine, because I think that's what it is, especially now during these more dark times in humanity. You guys are frontline workers as far as I'm concerned. You guys are, I really believe it. I think you guys are practitioners of an art form that makes people believe in God.
Yeah, if there's a silver lining to all of this, is that we really get, everything gets put in perspective. What is truly important for us in our lives, and what's meaningful, and how can we help each other? The sense of empathy that's come out of this, for me, has been extremely inspiring.
I guess to kind of piggyback off of that, we're going to get back at one point to live music. It's going to happen. The COVID-19 will be behind us. And I want to know, what do you hope both the musicians and the audience gets from this absence of live jazz?
I don't know. That's hard to answer. I've always respected nature and the way that evolution works. You don't see a lot of people choosing to ride horses from home to work because there's a better option, it's a car. Hopefully that's, better for the environment if you Tesla. But yeah, nature and humanity works in such a way that they will get what's best for them the easiest way possible. And I think as musicians, we have to respond to that, and rather than ask people to choose the option that benefits us, we have to find a way of making it work so that everybody benefits, so that it's not, we don't have to guilt anyone. If somebody wants to get music for free and there's the option and they can't afford to pay it, but they really need that medicine, I don't feel right telling them, no, you should spend the money so that I can have money. That just doesn't feel right to me, because it's available out there in the world. So I think we just have to get very creative and resourceful and find a way where everybody benefits somehow. I don't think the answer is to tell people to go ride horses again, using that as an analogy. So I continue to just have an open mind, listen to all ideas, and I mean, that's part of the reason I started the label, because we need to adapt. People aren't using CDs, and I care about the environment, so we developed the Biofolio, which is a origami. It's made entirely out of paper. You can recycle it afterwards, and I have 20 panels of liner notes and artwork. We just have to get creative. We have to figure out how we can coexist and continue forward in a way that's sustainable both for the audiences that have also been struggling during this time financially, and the artists who are definitely struggling financially. Yeah, we have to be resourceful and creative, and we will figure it out. We have no choice. We have to.
It's interesting you talk about the carbon footprint. One thing I personally do along with radio is I'm a visual artist, and I've been really embracing digital art mediums. And, if you want to make a print out of it, you can, and I get that notion. But I don't know if you heard that Coldplay, when they released their album at the beginning of the year, decided not to go on tour because they couldn't figure out a way to not have such a big carbon imprint.
Yeah.
And I find that interesting. I think it's so much more valid now than ever that, and I think that's the thing about this period right now. When you see a jellyfish going down a canal in Venice, there's a way that Mother Nature will write things out, and there's a way that the universe will karmically make itself cleanse, so to speak,
I remember right before all the quarantine began, I had somebody interview me who really pressed me on the fact that, as a label that embraces environmentally friendly options, that the musicians on the label are all touring, getting on flights and putting greenhouse gases out in the atmosphere. And I really appreciated somebody, really pushing me on that. And my response was, as jazz musicians, we don't have that many options for income, and that's one of the only sources of income that we have. And I wish, that the world would be okay with us performing online or not traveling, and, whichever local performances we have, we can stream to people throughout the world so we don't have to get on all of these flights. Or that, airline companies can embrace electric engines and things like that. But here we are having the entire Biophilia Records Festival online. Yeah, putting a lot less greenhouse gases out in the atmosphere. That to me, we have to celebrate the little things definitely during this period. And that to me is a silver lining of what's happening right now. I hope that we learn these lessons and we embrace the positive sort of effects that people not traveling has had on the environment. I hope I hope we remember those lessons, but I don't know. Not to sound dark, but we have a way of forgetting history as a species. But yeah, there's definitely been positive things that we need to celebrate about all this tragedy. There have been things that we can learn from throughout this COVID-19 crisis.
I would counter that notion of, traveling in greenhouse gases. A band like Coldplay can just say, we're not going to do it because they have the money. And the thing about jazz is that you're dealing with a medium that does not have a lot of money. You're not getting into the jazz arts because of some level of lucrative payback. And that's the thing that I find refreshing about this time with jazz musicians. I've been doing a lot of interviews. I've been doing them since 2011. I've done a lot. And what I've realized, and it seems rhetorical, but I've been really taught this, I think, from you all, and it's this notion that realistically, you celebrate the fact that everything on this planet happens once. No matter how much we Bill Murray or Groundhog Day, it will never happen again. And that, even when I look at the way a plant moves, and it won't move like that again, or the way the earth is influenced by someone after they've lived their lives and you sit at their funeral, everything is permanently altered and it will happen once. And this moment that we're living through is probably the highest form of improv. If there's an artist out there that understands this more than anything else, being something that's totally, off the cuff and impromptu, and then recovering because you're in it for the right reasons, I would say it's the jazz musicians out there that are going to be able to really take this in and kind of ingest and regurgitate it in a very creative way.
I mean, it's the freaking blues. I mean, that's where it all came from, blues, and we definitely have the blues right now.
Why do you love jazz?
Because of that. I mean, it all comes down to self-expression. I was a classical musician, and as much as I loved classical music, and I still do to this day, there's something so rewarding about sitting down at the piano with other people and we're all just being ourselves. There is a certain amount of responsibility towards each other that we musically make choices that don't get in the way of each other. But we're communicating on the spot. We are expressing our individual point of view, our life. It all comes out through the music in that moment in time. That one time, as you mentioned, that to me is I can't live without it. It's just very important to me. Not to mention the cultural heritage of jazz, and it doesn't only exist in the United States. I may have been born here, but my wife is Australian, and there's this beautiful community of Australian musicians there that's really inspiring to me. We were in South Africa. There's a long history of jazz there. I mean, Brazil, of course, Cuba, like all over the world. There's just this vibrant community of people that get it, and it feels very good to be part of a community like that.
So my final question to you is this: everyone has their interpretation, perception, so to speak, of who they think you are. Your family, your friends, your fans, but you're the one that's living your life. Who do you think you are?
It's just some guy that's trying to do good things. That's all. Yeah. I like music, and I like the environment, and I want to help people. That's all.
But, sometimes this answer gets very long, and other times it's just like a Twitter feed. It's very succinct. It's 120 characters, and there's nothing wrong with that. Hey, man, thank you for taking some time out.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you for helping all of us musicians share the music. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Cuba, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Fabian for his time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.